welcome back. I've decided to be taught many lessons by none other than Voltie herself because she knows things that I don't. So welcome back.
Hi, I'm Voltie, and I know more than everyone else in this format. And I am here to teach Kira, as well as all of you, what you are doing wrong and how you can do it better.
And today we've kind of landed on deck building. And deck building is a very broad and nebulous concept, I think, in the abstract of take card, put card into 60. Now you have deck. Now take 15 more card. Now you have sideboard. And I think people, myself included, fall into, really, I don't want to say obvious traps, but fall into patterns that may not actually be helping themselves as a player, because after you build the deck, you have to play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very easy to have an idea in your head about what a deck does, whether it's an established archetype that you want to reinvigorate, or whether it's an archetype that's fallen out of favor, or whether it's just a new card from a new set that you really, really want to try. And the issue is, whenever you have an idea in your head about what a deck does, that accounts for maybe 11 cards, and you've still got 49 to go. And if you don't really, really think about what the entire deck is trying to do turn by turn and how it approaches each of its individual matchups, you end up with 11 cards that make sense attached to the idea that you had in your head and 49 random cards.
Look, and I am victim of this. I will be like, I'll put my hand up, and I've come crawling to you many times going, here are 11 cards that I'd like to make work, please. And I will admit that I'm a villain because often the cards are, can you please make initiative work? And you go, you could literally just play anything else. And I go, but I really, really, really want to play initiative, even though the points list as it stands is really designed to make sure that it doesn't work the best way possible, because initiative is a touchy subject for a lot of Highlander players. But in talking about the idea, how do you do that then? You are someone who builds a lot of decks. It's, you offer deck building services where people can just throw 11 cards at you and you go, okay, great. Of your 11 cards, actually only 6 of them are going to work. You're going to have to give up on these 5 cards, because it's not just that these 11 cards in isolation are good. It's that these 6 cards that each have 3 card counterparts are much better in harmony with each other. And that's a skill that takes a lot of time to develop, that you've put a lot of time into.
Yeah. I mean, I build a lot of decks, both for work and just because that's how my brain operates. One of the biggest questions that I ask as soon as I receive a deck doctor submission or a deck request, for example, is, what do you want the deck to do? Not what do you want these cards to do? What do you want the deck to do? Because in a format that is so heavily predicated on synergy, because it's a singleton format and you can't just play the best 4 copies of every single card and make a curve, you have to make sure that your deck operates both when you draw these cards together and when you draw them apart. You need to make sure that each piece of your combos or each piece of your synergy engines, for example, you need to make sure that they either work in isolation with other cards and not just with this one other card, or you need to make sure that you are finding both pieces at the same time, whether that's by cantripping heavily or tutoring, for example. It's all well and good to think, well, if I draw these 2 cards together, this combo is really, really good. But if you're not accounting for how bad A is when you draw the other half of your deck and how bad B is when you don't draw A, you just get cards that don't do anything and they just waste your mana. And one of the key things to make sure that you understand is how many slots in your deck you are devoting to doing a particular thing. So in a deck like Nadu, where you only have a certain number of pieces that you need to have together, but you only have one copy of each, you need to put as many cards in your deck that either search for Nadu, because you only have one copy, or work with Nadu. And you can either search for Nadu and then search for nomads, or you can have more nomads effects and search for the Nadu. Or you have more ways to draw into Nadu naturally. And the reason that it's so easy to be like, well, if I find a creature tutor, I can just tutor for whichever half of the combo I'm missing. But that's not how games play out. Sometimes you draw neither piece. Sometimes you draw both pieces. One gets thought seized, and your tutor doesn't do anything because both your pieces are accounted for. And you're just down so many cards because of how the game is played out. But in saying that, if you don't play the tutors, sometimes you draw a 1-mana 1/1. That's kind of hard to kill by combat damage. So there are a lot of different problems that people run into when it comes to deck building. But I think the key thing that the vast majority of people get wrong is not having a plan. It's, I want these cards to do the thing. I want them to win the game. Everything else doesn't matter. Hot tip, everything else kind of matters. Yeah, that's a really important thing to remember.
Well, it sounds very much like there's two different lanes here. There's innovating, which is when you have an idea, you have 11 cards that you really, really want to play, and you need to create a structure that enables those 11 cards to do what you want them to do, and it sounds as well like what you want them to do is not just win the game. That's what everyone wants to do. Everyone's ultimate plan is win the game. How do you win the game? How are you getting there? What is your, A to B to C to winning that's going to get you there? And then it also sounds like there's going to be a second path, which is iterating, which is taking something like stock Grixis, stock Blue Moon, stock Thoracle, and figuring out, I think this is good, but here's where I think the deck is actually wrong. Or, I think this is good, but I really want to play Eris, Roar of the Storms in Grixis. And I'm going to figure out how to make this card work in Grixis while knowing that this is what Grixis's overall plan is. And so you spend a lot of time on the innovating side, where you're creating new decks and not messing too much with stock lists and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, both paths are theoretically viable if you don't make the mistakes that come with those paths.
Yeah.
So in terms of innovating, in general, having a plan for how cards work and building a deck around said cards only works if those cards are objectively powerful when put together. The reason that Nadu Nomads works is because when they're in play, the game is over. It's very different to be like, well, I can put Arabella and Curve into Delny and then do a whole bunch of damage and she's really hard to block. But that doesn't win the game. And yes, the cards that work with Arabella and with Delny are not as bad as Nomad Encore, but the effect isn't as good. So realistically, you have a couple of different options when it comes to, I want to make this card work, or I want to do this thing. You can make that thing the entire deck and make sure that thing works every time. You play every tutor imaginable that can put a Nadu in your hand or in play, and you do that every game. Or you build a shell of a deck that does a thing that sometimes does that thing with particular cards. So in the case of Eris, for example, it is one thing to put Eris in a deck like Grixis, where sometimes you play it and then you play another spell and you get a 4/4. And then in a bunch of your other games, you never get to cast it, but you're a deck where you need to cast all of your cards because you're playing a low resource game. Eris makes a lot more sense in Blue Moon, where all you really need is a threat to end the game, after you have taken control of the game. So if you really, really want to play this 8-10 mana dragon, you can, but you just have to make it make sense. And in a deck like Grixis, where all of your cards need to do something, having a card with a fail case is not good.
Mm-hmm.
In a deck like Blue Moon, where you typically have 5+ cards in hand the whole game, and you just need as few win conditions as possible so you can draw one of them and kill them, yeah, you can play the cool card. You can play the cute card. In a deck where you really, really want to make Arabella work, you can put a bunch of creatures in your deck that work with Arabella, that give her haste or protect her, or you can tutor for the Arabella. Or you can just play cards like Thraben Inspector that draw you more cards and sit in play and then make her do more damage. And it's easy to choose the wrong side of that, because when you have a card that you really, really want to play, you can just be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You can think that the card is better than it is, and you're wrong. You can think that a combination of cards is better than it is, and you're wrong. Or you can think about how a card plays out in an archetype, choose that archetype, and be wrong. You can think, well, Eris is a flying dragon in a deck like Grixis that has a bunch of cantrips to keep triggering it and keep making dragons, and you have a bunch of ways to get cards into your graveyard so that it costs as little as possible. It's not how that works. You know, at that point, if you're just looking for a thing that works with spells and works with cards in your graveyard, that is 60% of the cards that cost 5 or more in those colors.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not how that actually works. And as someone who builds a lot of decks that I don't get to play, or I never get around to playing, understanding and envisioning how games play out in your head is really, really important. You need to understand what it's like to draw this card in the late game when you need a card that does something. And if it doesn't qualify, maybe it's not good enough. You need a card that you can draw in your opening hand and be excited about drawing. You need the other cards in that opening hand to fit a certain criteria. Some amount of lands, some amount of spells, whatever it may be. And then you need to envision each of the different expected board states, what that card is actually going to do in those board states, and then whether or not it's worth the juice.
Well, isn't it like, it sounds very much like what you're saying falls into the, it's very easy to envision yourself winning with this combination of cards. But very rarely are people thinking about how they lose with this combination of cards, or how they lose when they don't assemble that combination of cards. You know, yeah, it's great when you have Arabella and Delny out and you have 2 Thraben Inspectors and you're able to do a ton of damage and gain a ton of life. And what about the situations where Arabella gets destroyed? What about the situations where Delny gets exiled? What if you don't draw either piece? What if, you know, your whole board gets Wrath of the Skies? You know, what are the instances in which you lose, and how do you mitigate losing? Sounds a lot more like what people need to be considering, rather than, how do I win? Here's how I win. This is the best possible thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in terms of the Boris deck that I played at Worlds recently and won the event with, it had 2 Thraben Inspectors and Arabella, and the most common question I got asked when people looked at that list was, why are you not playing Delny? Most of your creatures have 2 power or less. All the ones that do have some kind of trigger that benefits if you trigger it an additional time, and you can really benefit from your opponent not being able to block your creatures. It makes perfect sense as a card in the deck. And theoretically, if I was to play games with that Boris deck, and I had a companion as a 61st card that was a Delny, I would play it a lot of the time. But in all of the cases where I don't want to buy the companion Delny and then play it, having it in my deck then becomes a liability. Sometimes you need a 3-drop you can draw off the top that pulls you further ahead or closes the game really quickly with as few resources as possible. Sometimes you're way ahead and then Delny's really good. But if you're way ahead, anything's really good. Doesn't matter as much. The reason that Arabella made the cut is that she met very specific criteria that I wanted out of that card slot. She didn't cost mono white pips, so she worked with Arena of Glory. She dealt damage directly, whether she lived through combat or not, which was important. She dodged Maze of Ith, which was a big deal. She was legendary, so I could protect her with Caracas, which meant I could swing races, for example. She triggered Ocelot Pride, whether or not she survived combat damage. And then she had 3 toughness. She survived Massacre. That was the biggest thing that swung the point, was I want to be playing these cheap creatures anyway, and I need a card that survives Massacre, because if I'm playing into building a wide board, I'm asking to get massacred. And if I don't have things left over, I'm going to die. And so Delny being a 3-mana 2/2 that dies to Massacre and needs you to have stuck a board is so different to a 2-mana 1/3 that you can play a turn earlier, survives the Massacre that they play, and then works when you play out a bunch of stuff. And so, yes, in combination, those cards are really good. But only one of them works in all of the fail cases. And the other one only really works in the cases where you're already winning. And that was the biggest difference maker, was how often can I have a card that does at least something along with my plan A? And then what does it do in all of the cases where things are going wrong? So I highly prioritize creatures that have 3 toughness, like Archon of Emeria. I don't want to play any 3-drop creatures that would make sense that have 2 toughness. That's why Thalia Heretic Cathar wasn't in the deck, for example. I want things that have haste if they cost a lot of mana so that they do something, or I want things that are cheap, and if they die to Massacre, that's fine. And that was just really, really important to building a deck that operated in the ways that I needed it to when things are going wrong, while also maximizing its ability to do the thing that I wanted it to do when things were going correctly. A big part of how the deck was constructed was, if my opponent is going to be massacring me and toxic deluging me, I need to have resources to close the game. That's why Arena of Glory Flage is just completely broken in any of the aggressive white decks. That's why Goblin Bombardment is really, really, really broken, is you can convert your resources and a bad exchange into a positive exchange or an even exchange. And then when you expand on that, what if your opponent isn't doing anything to stop you? What if they don't cast Massacre? What if they don't cast Toxic Deluge? If they don't wrath you, Bombardment just sits there and it just threatens them. And all of your creatures just keep doing things until they wrath you. And when they do, they take a bunch of damage. If they don't wrath you, at some point, Bombardment just threatens to give your team double strike and they're just dead on the spot. And for that card slot, you don't get to have something that beats Wrath and also beats not Wrath.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I build decks, realistically, is you envision the best case scenario, what that looks like, what it takes to get there, what it takes to do that, and how often that wins the game. You then envision the worst case scenario, what happens if they do have everything, because sometimes they will. What are my plans, if any, for when they do any of the things that are bad for me? And if I don't have a plan for recuperating, can I adjust things so that the bad thing isn't as bad? or the bad thing doesn't happen as often. And then you have to envision all of the middle cases. And this is where people get stuck. They don't think about all of the games where things just kind of continue, where all of a sudden you've blinked and it's turn 13, and neither of you really know what is going to happen. This is a limited mindset when it comes to drafting and sealed. It's very, very important to get in your head that the middle cases occur the most out of the three categories of cases. They occur the most, but they're also like the most avoidable realistically, because sometimes if you haven't planned for the bad thing, it wins them the game. They massacre you, you lose your whole board, they play a Barragoyf, the game's over. Or the best case happens, and at no point is there anything they could have done about it. They mulligan to 6, they didn't find any of the things, they cast a ponder to try and find a land drop, they missed it and they died. And the middle cases tend to favor very heavily the better player who has the better deck. If you approach the middle cases as I want to get to a winning state, and you don't think about the middle cases as I need to avoid the fail case, you can really throw games away and you can lose a bunch of equity because you aren't accepting that the middle case of a stagnated game is something that you need to play in. You need to exist in. In my finals match, I was against lands, and on turn 2, on the play, Samir played a Tabernacle, and my deck had 30 creatures, and it had 2 moon effects in the main deck. And at no point did the Tabernacle turn into a mountain. The Tabernacle was in play for the whole game, and 16 turns went by. The Tabernacle had impacted me every single turn, and I felt monstrously ahead because of how I had approached handling this middle case. At no point did I deal with the Tabernacle. At no point did I stop playing creatures. At no point did I stop paying for creatures. I never found bombardment to turn my creatures into play it, dome you, don't pay the Tabernacle tax. I just existed in the middle case and played in a way that made sense with how my deck was constructed, in how I approached that middle case. I activated Lion Sash very aggressively. I built one large creature that I paid for every turn through Tabernacle. I saved my Swords to Plowshares until white was threatening to tutor for a land. I saved my removal for a creature that could actually matter on the board state. I played creatures for small amounts of value. I made sure I hit all my land drops because that's what you need to do when you're paying for a Tabernacle tax. I didn't flood the board. I didn't bombardment him. I didn't burn him out. I just very, very slowly beat Tabernacle.
Yeah, that was like the persistence game, like the endurance game of, okay, I now need to factor in a tax on every single creature that matters, and on creatures that don't matter, who cares? There is still some kind of value to be gained. You can, theoretically, Thraben Inspector, get a clue, not pay the tax, you still have a clue that will net you a card later. And you can kind of invest in the future of the game through what some people might sit down and look at and go, that's totally unwinnable because you have 30 creatures and you're a creature-based deck. You're never going to make it through a Tabernacle if you can't establish a board state in an aggressive deck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the middle case gets created once the winning state and the losing state are not locked in. And so the winning state for my opponent is I have a Tabernacle, I'm against a 30 creature deck, I have a Maze of Ith and a Glacial Chasm and a whole bunch of 6-drops in my deck, I have ways to blow up all their lands. That's his winning state. And the start of that is Tabernacle. And my winning state is, well, I drew Lion Sash. It's one of the few cards I have that has Graveyard Hate attached to it, and I'm against lands, which is a deck that really hates incidental Graveyard Hate. So he has taken a step towards the winning state by playing a Tabernacle. I have taken a step towards my winning state of playing a Lion's Ash. And at any point in time, I can leave the middle state by drawing a Blood Moon. I turn the Tabernacle into a mountain, don't have to deal with it anymore. At any point in time, he can convert the middle state to a winning state by blowing up all my lands, then I can't pay for Tabernacle, and the game's over. But until either of those things happen, we have to exist in that middle state. And we have to play correctly, and we have to understand what the decks are designed to do, how they are going to operate in that middle state. And if you're not accounting for that, this is why lands plays creatures. Even though it has Tabernacle in it, and it could just play no creatures, sometimes you need to have a creature in play. Sometimes you need to threaten a planeswalker. Sometimes you need to block. Sometimes you need to present some kind of pressure that isn't stapled to a Marit Lage, because a bunch of people have like moons in their deck. A bunch of people have Wasteland in their deck. And so building the deck correctly involves playing a bunch of cards for the middle state. And if you don't do that and you build your deck for always being in a winning state, you don't get to win those middle states. You haven't built your deck in a way that functions when you find yourself in those middle states. You haven't built your deck in a way to function when you're in a losing state. Yeah, it's one thing to be like, well, I have planes in my deck. If I get massacred, all my creatures die. You can just play a creature that's slightly worse and it has 3 toughness instead of 2. You can just do that.
Yeah.
No one will stop you.
It's not illegal.
It's not illegal. You don't have to play a card that encourages winning states or only works in winning states and doesn't work in losing states, when you can just play a card that's more balanced.
When it falls into this idea of, well, I have to play Brainstorm because it's the best card. Well, I have to play Thoughtseize. And there comes a point, a lot of what I'm hearing as well is you should very much be an active participant in your deck building and in the execution of your deck's plan. You should understand why you're playing Brainstorm, why you're playing Thoughtseize, what those cards do for you, and how they, in this kind of losing state, middle state, winning state, how they push you towards a winning state. Because from how this is all described, most games are played in the middle state.
Mm-hmm.
There is, on turn 1, you're both in the middle state. There is no established, I play Swamp, I'm suddenly losing. You play Plains, you're suddenly winning. You exist for the most part during these games in this uncertain middle state until your Arabella pulls you ahead because it domes your opponent for 3 when it attacks, and you gain 3 more life, and it puts you in a better position, and it pulls you ahead. And so kind of what I hear a lot is encouraging people to be active in their decision making, and forcing people to engage with the construction of their deck in a way that makes sense to them and in a way that encourages them to kind of build a deck properly. Play Arabella, not Delny, because of Massacre. Look at what exists in the format. And look, and that might be a concession to, my understanding is Massacre really exists for the Nadu decks, but you're going to catch that stray in that instance, because Boros aggro decks also fall into the category of a lot of little shitters with 2 toughness. And so you have to be able to look at the broader metagame and go, okay, the existence of a card like Massacre that exists in almost every sideboard that plays black means that I have to be way different in how I'm valuing these cards. Delnia Arabella is fantastic, but it's not fantastic into Massacre. And in the situations where it's not fantastic into Massacre, is there any situation where it's better than not playing Delny at all and saving that slot for your 3rd Soul Sisters effect or your 3rd Thraben Inspector? And that's a really interesting way to kind of engage. And I think it's really important to engage with how you build tech and pilot your deck as an active participant. And I'm guilty of it as well in the realm of most winningest Blue Moon list, that one, build it, play it, and neglect to understand the way in which, you're going to get to a point where playing back to basics doesn't matter. You may as well hold it to pitch to subtlety. You may as well hold it to pitch to force. you're going to get to a point where Magus of the Moon doesn't matter. Or maybe you've made the decision that Magus is terrible in the main and it should only exist in the sideboard, or vice versa. So it's a really kind of brilliant level up moment to think about deck building and about games and about how they play out in that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of small examples that you can take away where a card makes more sense in a deck until you sit down with it. For example, Kellen Planar Trailblazer. That card makes perfect sense in my deck. It's a Savannah Lions. It accrues value. What could possibly be wrong with it? The issue is, it's a Savannah Lions that requires a lot of mana to start accruing actual value. And until it's... How do I phrase this? So Kellen requires a lot of mana investment to do an important thing. And until then, it's a Savannah Lions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a Savannah Lions that costs red, which is important for a deck that has multiple basic planes. And it can't produce any kind of value in a lot of the middle states where your opponent simply has creatures in play. The difference between Kellen and Basri, for example, is that they are both Savannah Lions. They can both attack for 2 if you are spending all your mana, but Basri doesn't need to be in combat to accrue value. You can simply make a token. And the relevant part of the token is that it has lifelink, it is expendable, you can attack with it to trigger Ocelot Pride, you can put a Jit on it to get Jit counters, where at no point in time can Kellen do that. It is always going to be one individual creature that can accrue value. Thraben Inspector is a 1-mana 1/2, which attacks for 1, which is half as much, but it guarantees you the backside. And if you chuck the clue with Broadside Bombardiers, that gives you an extra bit of cardboard for Broadside that Kellen can't give you. Yes, the deck has Savannah Lions in it. Yes, it has 1-mana creatures that need to attack and stick around. But the active choices that you make during those processes is so important. Hired Claw was in and out of the deck for a while. And eventually I realized that spending the amount of mana that would be necessary to get Hired Claw to be a 2/3, so it survived a massacre, was too much mana. And because of how the metagame evolved, in order to get Hired Claw to become a 2/3, you need to play it, it needs to stick, and it needs to be able to get to combat. And if your opponent flips a Darcy and has a 3/3, you can't attack. Or if they play a Baleful Strix, you don't get to have your 3/3. So it didn't make the cut. Stadium Headliner, at the very least, can be used as a removal spell. It gives you extra tokens for things like Bombardment and Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride. And you don't care about the fact that it doesn't always attack for 2, because any of the Savannah Lions will get blanked by an X3. But Headliner gets to kill one of their blockers sometimes, and otherwise it's just a Savannah Lions. Kellen will sometimes draw you 5 cards in a game, but more often than not, it's going to be way worse. It's going to be a Savannah Lions, which is, as a base rate, something that you can accept. But this deck isn't going to play the actual card Savannah Lions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do that, which means any of the potential upsides have to be balanced against the potential downsides, as well as all of the middle cases where, yeah, it's a Savannah Lions until it's not. What does that actually look like? My Stadium Headliner attacked for 2, 3 turns in a row, and then I killed a Baleful Strix with it and got to keep a creature. My Basri was a Savannah Lions that attacked for 2 twice, and then I just tapped it every other turn and made extra creatures so that I could fight for the board. And so when you think about a card, Baleful Strix is actually the perfect example of this. There was a debate a while back where some of the Grixis players were like, do we really need Baleful Strix? it doesn't attack very well. It costs a lot of mana for something that doesn't do much, like it just draws a card. It pitches to force, but you never want to do that. And sometimes you need a threat that you're spending that much mana on to kill your opponent. And in that slot, there's Sprite Dragon, there's Slickshot Show Off now. There's a bunch of cards you can play that will kill your opponent. And if you want a defensive card, you can play an extra removal spell, because then you don't have to try and block the creature. You can play an extra interaction spell. But the reason that Baleful Strix is stuck around, and why everyone should play it always, is that it exists in the middle state, but it is at the top of the middle state. In the vast majority of games that you play a Baleful Strix, it will do something that is above rate.
Yeah.
It will be a 1/1 with flying that can attack a planeswalker. It's kind of annoying, that can block a large creature, and it will always replace itself. Baleful Strix is the ultimate Thraben Inspector. And yes, it won't just kill them in the same way that Thraben Inspector, but it will never fail you.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good. Like, putting a card in your deck that sometimes doesn't do a thing is really, really bad. And if the upside is there, or you need it for the deck to function, something like Worldly Tutor, for example, yeah, sometimes you have to play cards that have a fail case. If you need to draw anything relevant and you're hellbent and you draw a Worldly Tutor or an ET, you're just dead. That's the fail case. Is if you draw a land, you are dead, but you have to play lands. And some of your spells you draw and then you're dead because you don't get to draw a real card. But you have to play them. So that's okay. If you draw a Baleful Strix, it will always draw the card underneath it. And it will always be a 1/1 that is really annoying to attack through and really annoying to block and really difficult for certain planeswalkers to fight against, like Teferi Time Raveler. And that's really, really good. Yes, it's never going to completely blow out a game. At some point, they will have a spare creature to attack with, and maybe a Strix has to trade down. At some point, they will play, a Bowmasters or a Wrenn 6 or whatever, and like they can be up in the exchange because you spent so much mana on an Elvish Visionary. But that's still not as bad of a fail case as, oh, I lost the game because this card is in my deck and I needed it to be any other card at that point. Something to consider really strongly.
I mean, this has been a fantastic lesson. I feel so enwizened by this knowledge. And, overall, the general recap is understand that the middle state exists and that you will play in that space a lot. Wanting to play a lot of cards is really awesome and exciting, but sometimes you actually can only play 6 out of the 11 cards that you want, and you need to prioritize synergies, and you need to prioritize fail-safe cases. You need to think about Massacre when you're building your deck of tiny little shitters. And, overall, being a proactive deck builder will make you more present in your gameplay. It'll make you understand your deck better. You'll understand your outs. You'll be able to play to your outs better. Overall, big fan. We're learning a lot. And, to close us out today, where can people go to get deck building advice from you, can get deck doctor advice from you? Where can we connect?
If you want to find me on any of my social media channels, finding me through Discord on the 7 Point server is probably going to be the easiest way to go. Otherwise, I'm at Aunt Voltie on YouTube and Twitch. I make a lot of content on YouTube that is very specifically educational content. But if you would like to engage in coaching, for example, that is something I offer. And I'll make sure that the link to my website is in the description so you can have a chat, read through all of the Google forms if you want to ask any particular questions. In general, there are a lot of different ways you can learn about Magic and how to get better at Magic. And I like to think that I am a decently useful resource for people who are trying to get better at Magic, because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been thinking about Magic for God knows how long. And if you want to learn more and you want to find out what it's like or what it might take to get better at Magic and start doing better at events, reach out. That's what I'm here for.
Well, thank you so much for this lesson today. We'll be sure to send people over to your channel where they can watch all of your library of previous lessons. And thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's always such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we've got for you today. Voltie, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. You always have such wonderful wisdom to dispense, and I am always happy to listen to it. The rest of you, we're taking June off. We're having a little bit of a break where we can play more Magic and get further into the format. We're preparing for the 100K in July. And if you're curious about Pat's Sydney Showdown Spectacular 100K standard event, you can head to MTGBazaarEvents.com. MTG Bazaar is a sponsor of Raise the Standard. We are so incredibly grateful to Pat and the Bazaar crew for sponsoring us. We're taking June off. We will not have episodes this June, so stay tuned. We'll be back in July for all things Magic, coming back very shortly. Huge thank you to the Hen House Recording Studios for letting us use their space, and we'll be seeing you very soon. Take care.